The arbiter was reading from the classification ledger when envoy Dara Selen set the data core on the table. She didn't interrupt him. She didn't raise her hand. She placed it at the center of the round table, a matte black cylinder, no larger than a human fist, and folded her hands on top of it and waited. The arbiter kept reading. The 6 gallery tiers kept watching. I kept my eyes on the assembly floor from my station in the observer's alcove, and I thought, this is the moment. This is the one they'll remember. I had served as humanities intelligence liaison to the Star League Assembly for 11 years by then. I had watched 63 votes in that chamber. I had filed reports on trade ceiling renewals, on species classification reviews, on the periodic extensions of Tier 3 status that the Assembly's Compact Secretariat issued to Earth every 4 years like clockwork. So routine the delegates barely looked up from their scrolls. The classification had been in place for 22 years. In that time, Earth had sat in the lower gallery, the developing tier, the advisement-only seats, while the Assembly's full members set our output quotas, fleet tonnage ceilings, our colony found intervals. The arbiter's name was Thesservain. He was of the Crethali, tall, four-armed, the hide along his jaw ridge gone pale with age. He had served on the classification committee longer than I had been alive. He read our Tier 3 renewal with the cadence of a man reading a water bill. Humanities declared industrial index, 14.7, well below the Tier 2 threshold of 40.0. Humanities surveyed colony count, 6, well below the Tier 2 minimum of 12. Humanities registered capital ship tonnage, 340,000 standard units, well below the fleet maturity index of 1.2 million. Recommendation: renewal of Tier 3 classification for another 4-year period, with no change to output ceilings or fleet founding rights. He moved to the vote call. Selen had not moved. Her hands were still on the data core. One of the Vethran delegates, a younger one I noticed, not yet trained out of curiosity, leaned slightly forward. He was looking at the cylinder. Then he was looking at Selen's face. She was watching Thesservain with an expression I had learned to read over years of working beside her. Not anger, not impatience. The expression of a person who has already won and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. "Envoy Selen," Thesservain said, acknowledging her for the first time. "The advisory tier does not have floor access during a classification vote. If you have a procedural objection—" "I have a submission," she said. Under Compact Provision 7, Article 19, correction of the public record, the chamber went quiet in the particular way that large rooms go quiet when everyone stops pretending to do something else. Provision 7, Article 19. I had found it 14 months earlier, buried in the Compact's founding charter, predating the Assembly's current membership by 80 years. Any member species representative, and advisory tier species, the founding text specified, not the amended text, could submit corrective evidence to a classification record before a vote was finalized, if that evidence bore on the accuracy of the record itself. The amendment that had stripped advisory tier species of floor access had passed 31 years ago. The founding provision had never been formally repealed. It had simply been forgotten, or assumed harmless, relied upon to stay buried. Thesservain looked at the Compact secretary beside him. The secretary looked at his screen. He scrolled. He scrolled again. "The provision," Selen said, "is on page 340 of the founding charter, not the amended charter, the original." The secretary found it. I watched his secondary eyelids, the Crethali reflex for suppressed alarm, flutter twice. Thesservain straightened in his chair. "Envoy." The classification record before this assembly was compiled by the Compact Secretariat and certified 3 independent survey bodies. It reflects, Selen said, the data those bodies were given. She lifted her hands from the data core. She did not touch it again. That is Earth's actual archive. Production indices, colony surveys, registered fleet tonnage, energy infrastructure assessments. Every category the classification formula uses. Verified by our own survey bodies, independently, over 22 years. The figures in your record and the figures in that core do not match. She said it the way you state a fact about the weather. What followed was not chaos exactly. It was the sound a room makes when 200 delegates simultaneously begin cross-referencing. The data core's contents had already been distributed to every delegate terminal, the moment she placed it on the table. A precaution we had built into the Corps' release protocol so that no single authority could impound it before the chamber saw the numbers. The veteran delegate who had leaned forward was now sitting very still. The Oresi bloc, 3 tiers up, had pulled their heads together in a cluster. One of the hegemonic Krethic representatives, a species that had voted to extend our Tier 3 status every cycle for 2 decades, was holding a scroll in both hands and not reading it. Earth's actual industrial index, 94.3. Actual surveyed colony count, 31. Actual registered capital ship tonnage, 4.1 million standard units. Not a single figure in the Secretariat's classification record matched our real numbers. Not within rounding error. Not within a factor of 2. The gap between what the Assembly had been told and what we had actually built was not a clerical discrepancy. It was a document. It described, precisely and in the Assembly's own accounting language, 2 years of deliberate suppression. Thesservain was very still. "This is irregular," he said. Selene looked at him. She did not agree or disagree. "The Secretariat's survey methodology," he began, "is in the Corps as well," she said. "Our survey teams logged every Secretariat assessment visit for 22 years. We have the survey team's raw data, and we have what the Secretariat filed afterward." Provision 7. Article 19 requires the Assembly to enter all submitted corrective evidence into the permanent public record before any vote proceeds. She paused. "We're not asking the Assembly do anything. We're asking it to do exactly what its own founding charter requires. No speech, no accusation, no demand for apology or reparation or war, a data core, a charter citation, and a woman with her hands folded on the table. The vote on the Tier 3 renewal was not called that session. It was not called the following week. Compact Secretariat launched an internal review the same afternoon, which meant nothing except that the review itself was now also part of the public record. 3 of the independent survey bodies, cited in the original classification, filed corrective statements within 10 days. The veteran delegation submitted a formal inquiry into the classification committee's composition, dating back to its founding, and that inquiry named Thesservain's predecessor by name, and the name of the predecessor before that. I filed my final report from the observer's alcove the evening the Assembly suspended the Tier 3 renewal indefinitely, pending record correction. It was the 64th vote I had witnessed in that chamber. It was the first one that had not been called. Selene was waiting in the corridor when I came out. I asked her if she wanted to go over the schedule for the record correction hearings. She shook her head. "They know the schedule." I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "You built all of it while they were busy deciding what tier to put us in." She didn't answer. She started walking. She didn't need to answer. We both knew that the Assembly had spent 22 years classifying something it had never once looked at directly. And we both knew that the moment it finally did, in a chamber full of 200 delegates who had just watched Earth's real numbers appear on their terminals, the classification had not changed so much as ceased to apply. They had a file for everything in that chamber, tier for every species, a ceiling for every civilization, a formula that had stood for 80 years. They just didn't have a category for a species that had spent 2 decades building an empire in the space between the numbers they were allowed to port.